Microphones? Ah, yeah, it works. Okay. Okay. Thank you, and sorry for this somewhat delayed start of the session. So we are very happy to have for this session a wonderful panel, including the ministers for Spain of the Environment, Vice Prime Minister, and the Minister for Belgium of Energy, so representing the two forthcoming presidencies of the EU. There is a slight change to the program because we thought finally that it would be more appropriate for Simone to start presenting the paper that was published today on the Bruegel website, of which I'm the co-author with Simone and Georg Zachman, who is here. So he will be presenting the paper. Then we will ask successively Teresa Ribera and Tine van der Straten to react and also to present their views on the agenda going forward. And then we will have the panel with Kurt van der Berge and Leonard Birnbaum and Laurence Tubiana. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Simone.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you to all our distinguished guests today. To be here for what intends to be, from our side at Bruegel, a first reflection on the next priorities for the European Green Deal and, of course, for the European energy and climate policy at large. I promise to be concise so that we will have ample room for the discussion with the guest. Now, our starting point with Jean and Georg in this paper is a bit of a stock-taking of what has been achieved during this mandate by the European Commission under Ursula von der Leyen. And in our view, the legacy, the climate and energy legacy of this Commission is a profoundly positive one. We are convinced that under Ursula von der Leyen leadership, this Commission managed to basically set Europe on a trajectory to climate neutrality by 2050, setting clear targets, the 2051 even enshrined into legislation, a consistent 2030 target. Soon we will see proposals for the 2040 target. They managed to unleash a wave of legislation to get there. And last but not the least, there was also a success by the Commission in putting forward financing at the EU level for the green transition, and we will discuss that in a little while. And all of this happened at a time that was, of course, characterized by unprecedented crises that the Commission managed to somehow turn into green opportunities. So the legacy, in our view, is largely positive, but looking at it, we see clouds on the horizon of the green transition in Europe. And the reason why we see these clouds is that if we look at the factual emissions reductions that we have achieved over the last 5 years, 10 years, you will see that most of the emissions reduction happened in sectors that, let's say, are easier today to decarbonize. And namely, the major emission reduction happened in the power generation sector. If you look at sectors that are more difficult to decarbonize, transport and buildings, not much progress has been achieved for now in terms of emission savings. Looking at of the next 5 years, the speed of emissions reductions in these sectors, transport and buildings, will have to be accelerated by a factor of 4 vis-à-vis what was done over the last 10 years. And in our view, this is going to be challenging. This is going to be challenging because when decarbonization enters sectors like cars, buildings. That's when climate policy becomes visible to people. That's when the politics of climate action might become more difficult. And in order to navigate the difficult waters of the European Green Deal implementation moving forward, we are convinced that the EU needs to give itself a stronger governance for energy and climate policy. This is very important, in our view, namely for two reasons. We see two main problems that we urgently need to fix with this regard. The first problem is a problem of coordination between the EU and member states. In the paper, you will find an historical excursus of the development of our energy and climate policy. And historically, we have developed climate policy more at the EU level, while energy policy largely remains national, with a big degree of coordination, of course. But there is a coordination problem here when it comes to the EU level and the national level, which, moving forward, we are afraid might lead to a blame game towards Brussels, where countries come here, agree maybe on ambitious climate policies, but then go back to the national capitals and blame Brussels for that. So this is a problem that we think might well increase in the future. Second, distributional implications. As I just said, once climate policy really enters transport and buildings, the distributional implications of climate policy will become more visible and profound among European countries and within European countries. And namely, we are not only looking at the low-income households, which needs to be supported, but this is going to be a problem, we think, for the middle class, for the uptake of electric cars, the retrofitting of buildings, and so on and so forth. This is going to cost. And without a proper financing scheme in place to support this transition, without a proper EU action and governance, this is going to be, in our view, difficult. Now, today, the way we have structured the European energy and climate policy, the way we see it, is basically three pillars. We have the ETS, that somehow tries to deliver with a carbon pricing signal, decarbonisation in most of the sectors, by when we will also have the ETS2 into play. We have the national energy and climate plans, which are instruments to basically deal with the coordination issue that I briefly touched upon. And finally, we have EU financial support for the green transition in order to incentivize the process. Now, we think this structure is rational, but it's not fit for 55, as we used to say in the climate bubble. So it's not a governance that can deliver the kind of climate ambition we currently have. And let me give you just two quick examples with that regard. NECPs, the National Energy and Climate Plans. From our understanding, these have been a very important addition to the governance of the EU energy and climate policy. This was a major way to put in place a governance at the time for the energy union. But in concrete terms, we are afraid that these might remain largely a bureaucratic exercise for the time being, where there is not a strong compliance device by the EU side to steer action and eventually change the course of action if not sufficient at the national level. The second example I would like to bring is funding. Now, as I said, the Commission has been extremely good at putting in place additional grants for the green transition during the last years. We have made a back-of-the-envelope calculation about what can we estimate these additional climate grants to be vis-à-vis the, let's say, traditional European budget, so on top of that. Well, if you count the Innovation Fund, the Modernization Fund, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and the forthcoming Social Climate Fund, we are talking about a level of 50 billion euro per year of grants, only grants. We are not looking at loans, that the Commission put in place to steer this process. But we have a problem. And the problem is that around 2026, when the RRF will come to an end, this level of 50 billion per year will go down to less than 20. And therefore, between 2024 and 2030, we will have a gap of around 180 billion euros in EU green grants. This gap comes once we are trying to accelerate the deployment of solutions in transport and buildings, and therefore, politically, the timing, it's very risky. So what are we proposing to do in our paper? First, we think the ETS is and will have to remain the major climate instruments at the EU level, and while the next mandate will be about rolling out the ETS2, we think we need to start works to think about an ETS3 by 2035 to cover agriculture and the remaining emissions, and then bring the three into a unified ETS by 2040. Second, related to what just mentioned on the funding, we think it is high time to prepare works for a European Green Investment Plan. A European Green Investment Plan in the order of 180 billion between 2024 and 2030, a European Green Investment Plan that can really spur decarbonization in sectors like transport and buildings and really tackle the distribution implications of climate policy moving forward. Related to this is the conversation on the fiscal rules, which we had also in the morning, where we have provisions in the paper saying we think green investments should be considered more carefully in this reform, and countries that have public debt in excess of 60% of GDP but have sustainable public finances should be allowed to spend more when it comes to green. And then three other proposals that you will find into the paper, and I will come to the conclusion. The first is let's bring climate policy really at the heads of state and government level. In order to avoid this blame game between the EU and the national level, we need political ownership at the national level. How to do that? Last year, during the crisis, we have learned that the more energy ministers meet, the best to advance joint solution. Now, we cannot meet at the same frequency of last year, for sure, but in our view, having an annual summit on energy and climate by the head of states and government, prepared by a group of Sherpas, would be extremely, extremely important. And then data. We cannot drive an energy transition in the dark. Also, the energy crisis last year has illustrated that we often continue to lack in Europe consistent, transparent, up-to-date data when it comes to energy. And here is where we propose the establishment moving forward of a European Energy Agency that could mirror what we have for environment, the European Environment Agency. And finally, we need an independent network system operator at the European level to try to coordinate the investments that are required in the grid, and tomorrow there will be a big event here in Brussels on the grids, because that's how we will make sure that the uptake of renewables across Europe can really happen moving forward, based on the principle of European cost minimization. All of these might sound ambitious, and it certainly is, but the reassurance I wanted to give is that we have spent quite some time over the last months thinking at solutions that do not require treaty change. So all what you will find in this paper does not require treaty change. We understand the political constraints. Everything can be done if there is political willingness to do so. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Simone. The paper again is on the Bruegel website.
Yep.
I give immediately the floor to Teresa Ribera, but before I just want to mention that since the room is in the dark, you'd better ask your question via Slido, so slido.com with the hashtag decarbonisation. Teresa, the floor is yours. You're sort of very well placed to give us your...
To make some comments.
To make some comments, absolutely.
No, thank you so much. My first comment is a comment of gratitude. I think that the paper that has been prepared, crafted, published by Bruegel is a very interesting and good paper. And I have some comments also to pay tribute to the past that relate directly with your paper. Because in fact, I remember in the previous governance discussion, think tanks, and a lady is sitting in this room, We're also trying to combine some solutions to facilitate a centralized approach with decentralized approach. And this was the origin of the national energy and climate plans to be tested against, to be checked against the European interest. It was in the times of Connie Hedegaard being still the commissioner, and it also inspired the approach of the Paris Agreement. So how we can be pragmatic in terms of going forward, getting increasingly deeper in our pathways towards the full decarbonization in a manner that matches with the European values and with the due respect to both the European interests and the national context, the national backgrounds. And I think that we have made many interesting improvements, but still we have also seen that there are things that do not work as we were expecting that they could be working. That could be my first comment. So to pay tribute to think tanks' work, to pay tribute to those that try to improve and to build this European policy on climate and energy not from the scratch, but with the building blocks that did exist in those days. My second comment is that I'm increasingly convinced that it could be increasingly difficult to be fair and to be effective when dealing with mitigation if we do not take into consideration that the reality, the physical reality, has already changed. So adaptation and mitigation do come an issue with very relevant impacts in social terms, in domestic policy, and in the European policy. We have been seeing what is going on in Greece. Nobody can cope with such a situation without having a much more broader understanding on how we can work together to be ready to resist, to be resilient to the climate effects. But when we get into what type of finance we need, what is value and what is an asset and what is a charge, something that we will not be able to cope with, what type of infrastructures, what type of approaches to mainstream climate mitigation solutions in the different policies, we see that the reality has already changed. In water, in security, in the demand of energy, in the resilience of infrastructures. So that is my second comment, to add a little bit more complexity to the paper, how we can think with this, we think around these ideas, these proposals, combining these elements. My third comment goes a little bit along the 5 proposals that you have made. I think that the 5 proposals are pretty interesting, with some side comments that I could be making. First, yes, I think that the European trading system has been quite effective to deliver many outcomes, not to be sure how we can manage that in a way that can be absorbed by citizens when dealing with every single sector. So the very primary question marks 15 years ago could come back, as they are already coming back when trying to think if this is a system that could apply to buildings or a system that could apply to transportation. So not sure that this could be matching. It's attractive because it's a kind of centralized response that everybody understands and so on. But as you also state in your paper, what does this mean in terms of the impacts in the transitional times, social impacts in the transitional times, what is the background from every single country? I have a comment also dealing with the importance of properly assessing the social impact and distributional effects of every single policy. I think that we have improved our capacity to respond, and this is also well reflected in the paper. Now we talk about Just Transition Fund, social policies to deal with climate policies, investments in education systems and re-skilling people, so to facilitate the building of new opportunities. I think that this is the line to take. Certainly it is the line to take. We still miss some question marks on what is the fiscal and taxation policies, and how well aligned or consistent there may be among the different countries. At the end, we know that climate policy is touching every single thing. But if it is touching every single thing, we have a very constraint framework to work with that reality when we talk about governance and improvements. We need to go step by step, be pragmatic, and accept that the plan B may be the best way forward. My additional comment does go along the lines of what is the reading that any society, any citizen may make out of the climate and energy policies and being Europeans. And I take this point because I think that there are some very critical references that still very primary references that we still need to take into consideration. So people, business, governance, and inputs to make this change happen. And when I say that people is important, is what about the perception of people? You pointed this out. We have commented on the social distributional aspects, but not only culturally. What does this mean? How we engage people in this conversation, and the response is rational and obvious, providing access to benefits, so allowing people to experience the benefits since the very first stage, but that's not always easy, and the explanation is always complicated, how we can communicate in a very simple manner why it matters, why it is worth it to invest on this, dealing again with the opportunities, talking about education, skilling, employment, well-being in our cities, in the rural areas. These things would be very, very important, and we have not done enough. The message around the idea that this is good for business may be read in a bad way. If this is good for business, is this good for people? What does this mean? So I think that insisting, declining, and providing the platforms to ensure that it is good for people will still very, very important. Again, for business, of course, it is innovation, it is competitiveness, it is performance, it is efficiency. All of this is true, but business is a huge community of services, industrial sectors, and so on. So how we can ensure that this do work. First comment. Second comment, please do not miss the point. We talk about European interests, or we talk about national interest on industrial policies and national champions. And I think that it could be a big mistake to deal with this issue on the basis of national industrial policies. Of course, we need the national governments being involved on the creation of opportunities, but we want to build Europe because we know that we need to build beyond Europe. So let's not be restricted on that. But it's also access to finance. And I think that you have a point when you say, please, let's think how we tackle with the conditions, how we create the conditions for investment. It's regulation, it's cultural change, it's capacities, but it is also the understanding of finance and access to finance, creation of value and perception of risk. So I think that this is also very important, and keep this conversation with business community could be very important. Governance. Governance, I think that yes, it is there. I like the idea of counting on the heads of state, heads of government dealing at least once a year on this issue. I think that there is nothing in the current situation more important and more deeply impacting in the societies and in the economy than the energy and climate transformation. So it is a little bit a pity if we consider this too technical, if we consider this to be tackled by the officials or even by the ministers. We are very happy to work together, as you were saying, and it is fantastic, but I think it is too important not to ensure that there is a proper conversation at the very high political level. My final comment is on inputs. We cannot change what we are trying to get rid of, these dependencies that do create harm in our economies by other type of dependencies. So inputs, autonomic, strategic autonomy does count in this conversation, but it is also a great opportunity to build alliance, not only at the domestic level, at the European level, but also elsewhere with third parties. So how we can work with other partners. We have this discussion with Africa, with Latin America. We should be bridge builders and not too much aligned on one side or the other. These elements, I think, that are very well related among them. And my very final comment is that I like very much the idea of thinking about the European interest when talking about the transport system operators for energy, the common capacities to count on data and to count on assessments dealing with the improvements in the energy sector. So I think that, as I said, with some side comments on your proposals, I think it is interesting, and having this conversation between think tanks, people working on thinking, and policymakers would be very, very important to ensure that we have a proper mandate, an adequate mandate for the next Commission.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Slido after we hear from Minister Tine van der Straten, and give her also a chance for to Sibone to reply. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Also, from my side, a word of gratitude for organizing this event. Also to you, Teresa, to come here to Brussels, making the time in your very busy schedule, also at European level, to exchange thoughts on how can we better, if needed, manage a new legislative agenda on climate and on energy. I think in principle, everyone would agree here and also in the room that better coordination, better collaboration, that we need to do an update on our governance, that in any case it's always necessary. And maybe before jumping in, what would then be, which instruments do we need, or which fora do we need, or which organizations do we need? Let's maybe also take a first look on what are the challenges ahead before we set up any legislative or any new governance, because every governance needs to be fit for purpose, which is also the starting idea. Is this governance that we already have today, is it fit for purpose? And I have 5 main takeaways that will be, to me, important also for the next Commission. Already, I think we can begin thinking in terms of the next Commission to come. And the first point is it will not be a surprise, because we have been talking about this a lot in the last few months, and it's the competitiveness of our industries. It will be key and crucial. We have in Europe, also in Belgium, but overall in Europe, we have manufacturing industry present. We need also in this transition massive amounts of materials, products, half products. We need steel, we need concrete, we need glass, we need aluminium, and we are producing it already today in Europe. And so it is key and essential that we anchor these industries here, and so that we also help them to make this transition, this climate transition. And then we should be thinking about very effective instruments to do that. It could be through protecting our industries. It could also be subsidies or helping these industries. I'm open to the instrument, but it is something that is very, very, very key. It's about jobs, it's about people here, it's also about security, and then, of course, energy comes into play almost as the first thing, because these industries will need energy, so green energy, electricity, and also hydrogen. The second topic is carbon pricing is and remains key and essential. It is one of the questions was why the focus on the ETS. ETS is and was and will remain one of the most effective instruments that we have for climate policy already today. And so keep this instrument and implement it further in the different sectors will be essential. Which brings me to the third point. Our transition needs to be social, inclusive, and also a just transition. And we can also use the ETS for that means. We can use the ETS revenues in the Social Climate Fund and to help people and also, for example, SMEs, which are also here in the question board, to have this just transition. We have been talking the last year a lot about energy efficiency, about reducing demand, very crucial for our security of supply, but don't confuse things. It's a sobriety, sometimes used as a word. Energy is also a distributional issue. There are still people that don't have access to energy, are not able to heat their houses, do not have the financial means to do a renovation and so on. And therefore, this social aspect will remain crucial. And the fourth topic is about standardization. We are not going to achieve anything if we don't have any standards. And then automatically comes into play better collaboration, better cooperation. We can continue to outcompete on the biggest, the highest wind turbine. But we need these wind turbines in the seas to be built very fast now because we need the electricity. Maybe we can make hydrogen out of it. We need also those hydrogens in our industries, for our households, for our SMEs. And in order to have a level playing field and in order to build quickly, we should be able, and this is maybe something that we could take on us as policymakers, to put forward in tenders. This is a standard that we are looking for. This was one of the outcomes of the North Sea Summit that we have organized in Belgium, and then afterwards the Mediterranean countries did the same thing in Malta, on how to work on this in a sea basin, how to better coordinate between these countries. And the standardization was one of the takeaways. Also, we should not underestimate is what the wind industry is asking from us. And if we can, we need more speed, and standardization can be one of the key levers to achieve it. And that brings me to the last topic, that's massive infrastructure. We need more and better infrastructure, and therefore we have seen a very good coordination on the ground. We had the North Sea Summit and then the Mediterranean, the Med9 Summit. I think only a month thereafter, the North Sea countries coordinating, the Mediterranean countries coordinating, each for their sea basin. But a strategy is a pan-European strategies for the sea basins will also one of the means to arrive at this investment in infrastructure. Large-scale energy infrastructure for which we will be needing European oversight, coordination, planning, and also a generalized way or more a common approach in how to finance this infrastructure. And then maybe to coming to your paper that you have written, I really like the idea of having Sherpas and a more dedicated approach. But let's not invent. In Dutch, we say the warm water, and build on experiences that we already have.
Yeah.
With the energy crisis, energy was put on the agendas of the head of state and heads of governments during every UCO they had, and this was in very close collaboration with the energy ministers, because they put forward what energy ministers, what they expected from the energy ministers, and it was then in the Energy Council, and we've met sometimes every 2 weeks to put into place these instruments. It's the same kind of working. It's you have a high-level agenda, and then you put it into practice through a more specialized organization, in this case, the EU energy ministers. It's also the same thing we did with the North Sea Summit, in which we had heads of states, heads of governments, also the line ministers, and also the industry present. And it's this type of more deepened and deepened collaboration that will be crucial also when we are looking for a better governance. And then about the independent system operator for Europe, I would immediately say yes, and where can I sign? But we should not make, we should also be critical towards ourselves and also maybe sometimes kill our own darlings. Because if we, and I'm now looking also to Kurt and to Teresa, if we need to set up a European system operator, how much time will it take? A time that we don't have, because the next decade is crucial. And then if we are looking maybe sea per sea basin, if already the projects that are in place, I will speak for the North Sea, we have, and for Belgium, we have projects with Denmark, with the Netherlands, also with Germany. If already those TSOs should be working closer together, why not also with some European oversight? It will be a bottom-up approach. I think with the independent system operator, we should be looking for some middle ground between a top-down and a bottom-up approach. The main takeaway is speed, 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 and therefore there's no time to lose. I was trying to tackle some of the questions, but questions will come later on, I think.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to give the floor back to Simone for a few responses. My take from what you both said is that the notion that the governance needs to be strengthened. You both expressed support, for example, for this idea of having Sherpas and taking the energy or keeping the energy and climate issue at the level of heads of state and government. You expressed some doubts on the, what requires some more legislative construct, and therefore for which you would be facing a trade-off between what you want to achieve and the urgency. So those are issues on which Simone may wish to react. I see on Slido that there are also many questions about the ETS and the value of bringing the hard-to-abate sectors, which is a sort of fig leaf for speaking of agriculture, under the ETS system. Questions, wouldn't it be more direct to proceed differently?
Yeah, let's say that with our proposal, the idea is not to add additional burden, but really to try to optimize the collaborations that are already ongoing. Take the energy Sherpa example, is not to add an additional layer of complexity, but is really to, in a way, formalize what very spontaneously during the crisis was done last year. And when it comes to the transmission system operators, the idea is not to have a European entity owning parts of the network, but really an entity that is empowered to steer collaboration and to identify where the bottlenecks are, in the view that only if we do that in an efficient manner at the central level in terms of having a European view, we can ensure that the uptake we need of renewables moving forward and the great electrification wave we need moving forward will actually be achieved in an efficient manner. And everything at the end boils down to the principle of efficiency and the fact that if we build national walls, there might be higher costs for all Europeans. And when you tackle that from an energy price perspective, I think that very quickly goes down to the industrial repercussion of all this discussion. Now, we didn't tackle in this paper the industrial policy side of things, because for that, of course, that's a different animal, and we have been working a lot in the last months with colleagues at Bruegel to try to inject some ideas into the Net Zero Industry Act process, but certainly I think we can all agree this needs to be at the core of the new agenda, right? So the idea of having, for real, a green social contract that takes care of the distribution and implication on the one hand, and makes sure we create the jobs we need moving forward and the supply chains we need, I think we all agree should be at the core of the agenda. And the way we characterize all of this in the paper is what we are facing is nothing than an industrial revolution against a very tight deadline. And I think this is something that is unprecedented, because industrial revolutions typically were technology-driven and spontaneous. These started as being significantly policy-induced. Now, parts of this transition now is not policy-induced anymore, because some of the technologies are mature enough to go alone, but we haven't secured all the sectors. So until we secure these technologies and make sure they are competitive even without policy support or political support, we are vulnerable to potential backlash. And that's where I think we will need to focus our action moving forward. I will stop here to allow the others to intervene.
Okay, thank you. Let me move to the next phase of the debate, starting with Bernard Birnbaum, the CEO of E.ON. Before the session started, you told me that governance is perhaps a distraction. That you, as a CEO, you want to see action, you want to see urgency, and anything that goes in the direction of more complexity is perceived more as an obstacle than as a solution.
Yeah,
So,
you phrase it very undiplomatic, what I say.
yeah. On purpose.
On purpose. So for a good discussion, let me be a bit edgy. And I speak for E.ON, but also for the European energy industry in my role as president of Eurelectric. Now, just what is the challenge that we are looking at? So in financial terms, and you have all heard different numbers, so I'll just pick mine now, which are the Eurelectric numbers. We need to invest now 1.5 trillion into renewables in the next 7 years. There are other numbers, but it's a huge amount. And it's more or less twice as much as we have invested in the last 7 years. On the grid side, it's exactly the same. We estimated as Eurelectric that the DSOs only need to invest 400 billion. Now, that was before Repower EU, and now before the crisis, and before the acceleration of renewable target. Give or take, our ballpark number is on every euro in renewables, €0.5 in grids. Yeah? So that would bring us to 800 billion to 1 trillion, whatever the right number is. Doesn't really matter. It's again a huge number, all until 2030. Now, that is so abstract. Now, let me just tell you what this means for a company like my company, E.ON. I mean, we are, if we include Turkey, I'm sure we are the largest grid operator in Europe. It means that we did a calculation. If we take those targets, what does it mean in terms of connections of renewables, PV, wall boxes, batteries, etc. And we came to the conclusion we need to make a connection every 7 seconds until 2030. Every 7 seconds, one connection, which needs to go into the system, needs to be connected physically. Right now, we're doing every 30 seconds one connection. Yeah? So for us, it's an acceleration by a factor of 4. 1/3 of my workforce is retiring in that decade. Yeah? I need loads of more people. I need to fully digitize it, and I need to hire people like hell, which are disappearing. You all know the demographics. And so I'm just wondering, if I think about 2030, we either deliver this decade or we fail. Yeah? It's either delivery or delusion. And so in that sense, now I'm just wondering, if I look at governance, which of the governance proposals helps me the next 3 years? And if it doesn't help me the next 3 years, for my midterm planning, it's already irrelevant. And that is, now I'm looking at an agency, setting up an agency. The only thing that I see is we'll probably ask for more reports. And they will probably, on top of all the reports I'm already delivering, they will ask for the same data in a different format. And then they'll give it back to me and ask me to do something with it. So the challenge is this really helping me? If we do a European coordination, I mean, it's part, the industry is also, it's also the industry's fault. If we ask for an industry body which does coordination between the TSOs, TenneT right now is getting out of Germany because they want to be only responsible for the Netherlands. Germany is trying to consolidate the TSO landscape on a national level. And then comes a European entity and says, oh, by the way, now you have just nationalized it again, I can coordinate you. So this will take us easily into 2030. So for the decade of delivery, the governance, changing fundamentally the governance is not my key, my key worry. It's demographics, delivery, connections, building renewables, etc. Because this is what really makes the energy transition a success or not. Now, I think we need a power infrastructure deal. We need to have a much higher focus on infrastructure. It has been neglected in the discussions so far because it has been taken for granted that we have it.
Exactly.
But it's not going to work because if you look at it on a local level, the energy transition happens in the countryside and there is no netting of demand and supply in the countryside. So if I will celebrate in October as E.ON the connection of the 1 millionth feed-in point into my German grid, only the German grid, 1 million feed-in points. Most of them actually are on the countryside, and those actually mean that I need to completely rebuild the medium voltage distribution grid because I can't net all of that additional production in the countryside with additional demand, efficiency, etc., because nobody's living there. Yeah? So demand is going up a little bit, but production is exploding, which means that my grid is too weak not to distribute. It's not a distribution system, it's a collection system. And so in one way it's still fine, in the other way it's too weak, so I need to completely rebuild my system. This is the challenge which we have in this decade. So what I would say, we need a power infrastructure deal. And the good thing is, in the current electricity market design discussion, it would be possible to give mandates to the national regulation authorities to at least define what they should achieve with whatever they do on a national level without taking away the responsibility from the nation states for regulation, which again would probably take 5 years if it would ever happen. And so there are governance changes which we could do, which we could implement in the current framework and which would have an immediate impact. And so, and now I was more diplomatic because I was saying we can take all those proposals and we should discuss them because they take a lot of time to be implemented. We should maybe add a layer before, which is very pragmatic, focused on having impact in the short term. So this is the way that I'm looking at governance. It's like, and if you allow me, I know I've been speaking too long, but you feel I'm emotional about it. In the last year, the European market has saved us. It has created all kinds of trouble. But how would Eastern Europe have had an energy supply without Western Europe? How would have France had enough electricity without Germany? How would Germany have had enough gas without the infrastructure of Belgium and France? How would Austria have been supplied? So, the last year was a huge success for Europe. And so what we should do is we should keep the integrity of the market absolutely together, and then just build on it and just make sure that we now really focus on the delivery. And as I said, I would support that we add something like a European deal on infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was clear, relatively blunt, but I think the message, and it's appreciated. The message was really, something we needed to hear from a practitioner. Let me give the floor to
1 second.
1 second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to say
Go
that,
ahead.
of course, you're right. What you will find in there is not something that can be implemented for the next 2 years, but the institutions have a responsibility to deliver on the short-term needs while also building what will be required afterwards, right? So here, the point is not really what happens apart from the financing, up to 2030, but really, what do we need between 2030 and 2050 to deliver on that difficult phase of the transition? So there is no trade-off in reality between the short-term action and the long-term action. Institutions should get good at both. And The problem we might have is that being drawn into the short-term problems, we often forget about these, but anticipating these issues and working now to build a foundation is of paramount importance, because I don't think it's a matter of adding a couple of reports, unfortunately. I think last year we experienced it extremely well, that we did have a huge problem when it came to understanding what's going on the market when it comes to gas. We have a huge problem when it comes to understanding what's going on the green transition, on the clean tech manufacturing. And if we are serious about our targets, and if we are serious about getting to 2050 with the targets and the society we want to get, well, I think some of these will be needed.
Yes, I want to defend Simone and to say that I agree with some of your comments, but not with all, which is, I think, normal. I think that you are right, and my reading on about the Simone's paper was more or less aligned with the idea on how we can build from what we have already achieved, and how we can combine the very short-term measures that do impact and create improvements without forgetting where we need to go. And this is the type of debate that we need to tackle and to handle right now, because otherwise we could be trapped somehow in the years to come. You say that every single 7 seconds you need a connection. I wonder whether these connections take place or not. And I'm not talking about Germany, I'm talking about Spain, because I receive lots of demands saying that people are not being connected. I wonder to what extent being very well interconnected do prevent, as you say, additional harm. I wonder to what extent having a deeper assessment on what are the vulnerabilities that we were creating when relying so much for a single provider could create some harm to European citizens. So I think that 2022 was fantastic in terms of feeling the pride of being Europeans and responding on solidarity basis, flexibility, and trying to accommodate the proper response to every single concern. But I think that there is a kind of deeper understanding that we need to fit all the time in order to be in a position to provide the right answers whenever any problem comes up. And it's true, I'm reading the questions that are coming from the public. And of course, the concerns of a very relevant player in the management of the grids is not the same than the concerns of the small and medium-sized companies that do think, what does this mean for me? How can I handle? And there are common question marks that are still there, and you pointed some of them. What about the demographics? What about the skilled people? What about the attractiveness to compete in a global market for further investment, how we can respond to the social concerns of this very needed enlargement of the grids, because if people do context to this enlargement, we will not have enlargement. So I think that we need to combine different things. But my main lesson, and what I get from what we have got up to now, and still curious to learn from everybody, is that you also agree on this idea on how we can keep on building in a very pragmatic manner, so to combine the very short-term responses based on what we have already achieved and small changes with the need to keep a much more deeper and mid and long-term thinking on how we can be sure that by 2030, 2040, we are in a good shape. Because at the end, what we will have in 2030 will depend on how forward-looking we are right now. Just to be a little bit fair on this idea on being pragmatic, on thinking on the air. I think that we need to be thinking on the air and to be pragmatic at the same time.
You're clearly the better diplomat than I am. But just very short, I don't think there is a big difference in terms of what governance can do in the short term and the long term. And the minister said speed 3 times, yeah. And I was just emphasizing this short-term angle. But to be very clear, these connections are happening. We can see the connection requests, and we are delivering against them. Actually, the requests which we are getting are even multiple times higher, because the project developers, for every connection they make, they ask us 200 connections, yeah. So, you know, in different constellations. So the dynamics are huge. Yeah? On the other side, Europe defined that the way out of the dependency, the way towards providing customers a fair deal is an accelerated energy transition. So I also don't see the big, kind of a conflict between being faster, delivering faster on the infrastructure, being faster on the energy transition, and a fair deal for consumers. But it's a calibration game all the time. This is our industry: security of supply, affordability, and sustainability.
Okay, time to give the floor to Kurt van der Berg, who is now Director General for Climate, but he was before the brain father of the Green Deal, so to say, in his position of advisor to President Ursula von der Leyen.
Thank you very much, Jean, and thank you for this kind introduction. The Green Deal was the result of a big team effort at the whole Commission under the political and visionary leadership of President von der Leyen. So I certainly wouldn't want to claim the qualification that you give me. Like the ministers, I would also like to thank Bruegel, Simone and Jean for their input, which is for us very timely, very welcome. I also would like to wholeheartedly thank the ministers for being here and participating in this debate, which is important for us, because we are evaluating as we speak the governance regulation. And I understand that Leo is saying governance doesn't help me in my business. But if we have to get the governance right, if we want to optimize the framework conditions in which your company and your sector are working. And we're all already thinking ahead to the next Commission, indeed, where I think it is very clear from our perspective, at least when I can speak for DG Klima, that for us will not be a question of decreasing or increasing the ambition of climate action. It's really of implementing what we have now agreed. We have to stay the course, as we have done over the past 3 years, with big challenges: the pandemic, the Ukraine war, the IRA, which is also a wake-up call. So we have to continue. And implementation for us is not something that is technocratic or bureaucratic. It is very, very political. What we will need to do is to really look indeed at how to mobilize massive investment, and there your paper makes the right emphasis. Leo mentioned a few figures. We know that for the energy system we need between 600 and 700 billion euros per year of investment. Very expensive, because we are very much locked into a fossil-based system of which we have to get out. And that does not incorporate all the investments needed for the transport system, for example, which are also massive. We have to design an industrial revolution, as you call it, Simone. And one thing that really keeps me awake at night, if I may be honest, is that we don't have a solution for the energy-intensive sectors, the energy-intensive industries in Europe. That is really something we will need to tackle, and where Executive Vice President, who has now been entrusted with the Green Deal coordination, will make that his first priority. And there, I think what Minister van der Straten said is very important, the necessity of standardization. Let me give you one example. We need a massive rollout of e-charging infrastructure. The market will be there. There's no question of return on investment. But the investment is not happening at the speed and scale we need, because there's a lack of European standards. Standards on connection to the grid, standards on data interface, and so forth. So we really have to look in the next Commission, I believe, at a host of initiatives that are not regulatory in nature, but that really help to unleash that investment and make this industrial transition happen. And I also would like to add that the international dimension will be very important in this. I think Minister Ribeira is absolutely right that we have to ask the questions about our dependency, but we will not be autarkic. I've just come back from Nairobi at the African Climate Summit, where also Laurence was. Africa is making the turn as well. President Ruto clearly said the Green Deal is also for Africa the opportunity to develop ourselves. The African continent is the continent of solutions for the green transition, but it needs our participation. It needs our support. So we have to become much more agile and strategic in how we reach out to the rest of the world. Now, in terms of where we are now, I think we have the European climate law. Our goals are clear. Let's not discuss this. Let's discuss how we make it work. And there are a few quick pointers, if I may. We are getting now the national energy and climate plans from the member states. We have 15 so far. We still are lacking 12. We see that member states are increasing the number of measures they take. We hear from the member states, and I really would like to thank also the leadership there of the ministers, because your role in this is critical. We see that administrations really want to make this work. No one is giving up. But it is a struggle, because now, with the implementation of what we have agreed, this is where the rubber hits the road, as the Americans are saying. These are difficult issues very often. And in October, we will come with the first climate action progress report under the climate law, which will give the cold facts of where we are and where we need to be, and what the role will be of the national energy and climate plans. And I just mentioned this just to say, as also Minister Ribera was saying, we already have a governance framework in place. We need to optimize it. We need to make it work better. And there your ideas are very welcome. I think we need to discuss them. But let's not go for an institutional revolution. We all know where revolutions end. Simone, you said we need to accelerate. We need to do 3 or 4 times more in terms of cutting emissions compared to the previous decade. That is true. But I also would like to say that things are accelerating a lot in our economy. 10 years ago, we didn't have renewable energies at the price and efficiency that we have today. We didn't have the inroads of electric vehicles that we have today. So I think what we see is not only climate tipping points that we need to be very careful of, as also Minister Ribera was saying, but also the transition tipping points that we need to identify and work on so that this industrial and economic transition is accelerated. On ETS, no need to convince us at the European Commission. Not later than yesterday, President von der Leyen in Nairobi said that the answer to the global climate crisis is pricing of carbon. And that's going to be our big priority in the next Commission, is to extend to the rest of the world emission trading or carbon pricing. Just to give you a figure, we have, thanks to ETS, reduced emissions in the ETS sectors by more than 37% since 2005. And in the last 10 years, the ETS has generated revenues of 152 billion euros. Last year alone, 38 billion euros, which in the major part go back to the member states. And we have now agreed with the Council and the Parliament that from now on, 100% of these ETS revenues will be invested in climate and energy, which is a very big source of revenue for investment, which we will need to use smartly. And when I say smartly, it doesn't mean in a fragmented way. It really means in a sufficiently EU-orchestrated manner. One point on the distributional impacts. There, I think we have made inroads, as also mentioned by the ministers. People sometimes forget, but under the ETS, there is a solidarity allocation of allowances for the 10 lowest income member states. There is a modernization fund where 13 member states will get 60 billion euros, including for investment in transmission networks. And we now have the Just Transition Fund. Soon we will have the Social Climate Fund, where actually I agree with those who say it's too small. But member states can add, including from their ETS revenues, as much as they want to that Social Climate Fund, which could become much bigger in order to make sure that we indeed cope sufficiently with the distributional impacts. Let me come to the point of EU coordination. This is, of course, the heart of the matter, if we want to make this work. I prefer to talk about orchestration rather than coordination, because everyone agrees with the need for coordination, but no one wants to be coordinated in reality. I think what the point that Minister Rivera made is essential. Let's find the right balance between central and decentralized. And that is already happening in practice with national energy and climate plans, with summits like the Ashberg Summit, the Ostend Summit, the Malta Summit, which are exactly good to make sure that the market understands where the investment needs to go. But we probably need to be much more strategic and responsive, EU and member states together at the European level. For example, when we're faced with an IRA, we react very quickly. We try to react very quickly with the Green Deal Industrial Plan, with the Net Zero Industry Act, but we very much rely on the goodwill and cooperation of the member states. And the fact that we have had to come up with the TCTF, the Temporary Crisis Framework for State Aid, is not the optimal solution if we want to really have a quick and sufficient European response. We're trying also with DigiClimat to find the optimal balance. We now have, for example, the Innovation Fund, which will have 40 billion euros until the end of this decade. We are organizing auctions. In November, we will do an auction for the first time ever where we will subsidize for 10 years the cost of production of renewable hydrogen. We can expand this to battery manufacturing, to electrolyzer manufacturing, to the whole array of technologies that we need. We're ready to do this, but the money we have is peanuts. We have made a proposal in June in the MFF midterm review to have more money, a little 5 billion. Even that member states don't want to give us, we hear. So what we're now proposing is that we do these auctions as a service to member states, where we organize the auction, we fund the first bids that come in, and then we go to the member states and say, these are bids that are on your territory, that have passed the auction, a competitive mechanism in a single market perspective. Please, member state, have a look and fund that bid with state aid facilitation, with all the money you have from the RF, from the ETS revenues, from cohesion funds, etc. We will try to do the same thing in the international exposure, Team Europe approach. We cannot afford anymore to go as Commission to Africa, and then Germany goes, and then another member state goes, etc. We need to really get together in a Team Europe approach. So when we hear Chancellor Scholz this morning saying Germany needs to pull together, he's right. But actually it's Europe that should pull together. One last point I would like to make is, and in a further round I'm happy to go into the details of governance, regulation, and post-2030, the 2040 target, etc. Energy and climate indeed are and need to become much more Chefsache. And it's very good that the leaders of Europe take ownership of these issues. But let's also not be blind to the risk that when things go to the European Council, there is unanimity, which can often block things. We were very lucky with the whole for Fit for 55 package that no leader has decided to put this on the agenda of the EU Council because of the whole turmoil in Ukraine, etc. So, yes, Chefsache, yes, the necessary strategic discussion, but not if it is at the expense of majority decisions, which would also make the life of energy ministers and climate ministers much more difficult.
Thank you. I think I don't have the time to pursue the discussion. I want to give the floor to Laurence because she's been patient and she deserves it, and we all want to hear your views. So you're chairman of the CEO of the European Climate Foundation, but also the...
A little bit of long time on climate, yes.
Yes.
Very good discussion, very good paper. And of course, I will be at the same time approving and maybe opening some of the windows and in a way, warnings. And again, I really want to rejoice of the collaboration between ECF and Bruegel, because we wanted to put climate into macroeconomy and macro discussion. It's happening now every day, so just great. I do think that, the governance elements are good in the European scene because it creates a past dependency that can prevent when there is a political backlash. So that's useful to have now a council and a scientific council, and that we can improve. Your idea of an energy agency for Europe all can seem that things that will not solve the problem, but will create these past dependencies that sometimes are very useful. And that, I think, is well done. We need really much better NECPs. We need to be much clearer, sectoral targets, indicators, data. All this is really important because what we are lacking is really accountability and transparency about all this. And I think there are different efforts to try to grab data, to understand what's going on, to open to the public the discussion. There is almost no oversight of the NECP in countries, including Parliament doesn't know there is one sometimes. So there is a lot of clarification, strengthening the instrument that I think is very good in the paper. I have the same question that Kurt on the head of state Sherpa level. Of course, good, but when I look at the past of European environment and climate policy, most of the time it was because of the front runners, and we can't kill the front runners element. So it doesn't necessarily in contradiction with the view of the paper, but I think the paper consolidates, but we have to have the window of ambition open, because again, you take 40 years of the environment policy, it was never something on unanimity, never. And the Green Deal is not something about unanimity, it's crisis management mostly, with a successful, very successful management. So that sort of flexibility in the way we develop ideas, which I think is important. Second, I think we have to work more, and maybe that could be a development of the papers and the research, as a sort of multi-layer governance. Why? Because what exactly Teresa said. Now we are, it's not we can have the backlash, we have the backlash. We have the political backlash is not totally clear, and because of Ukraine war and the security element, the social backlash is there. You see that on the heat pumps story in Germany, the low emission zone somewhere else. The backlash is now pumping up everywhere for good, bad reason anyway, but they're there. That's why we need the local, the different layers and the people involvement and ownership to own, because I don't feel the unanimity, and we don't know what happened with all the election in Europe anyway. So I think that we should think about. Sometimes I talk about the sort of in gymnastics, a choreography of the governance, because you need at some time to rely on the local, to make pressure on the national level and of course on the European one, and we have to be sort of using judo to do that. The point on the, for example, the resistance against renewable energy now in many societies is because people don't see why, and that could be even more on the connection where you have so much resistance. But if people were more involved and more owning, including the resource, the benefits, they could understand and own the connection problem. And I think that the default for me, because for the moment, and again, in my country in particular, it's always top-down. And it is big project of solar, then you have the farmers against, and then they don't understand what you have a big transmission line. When there was a local community and rural community designing the project, I don't say that everything should be decentralized, because the decentralization is a condition for accepting the transformation of the model. So maybe in the governance element, the local thing, it's people participation, but it's not consultation only, is people owning the elements. And that's why in Germany, in a way, still, the renewable energy works better than in France today. Then I think where we have been very, very bad in the selling the climate and policy and mainstream it into the energy policy is because the story was the renewable energy is cheaper and nobody has said the impact on the bills, and in particular during the crisis. So we have to think about how we rearrange, re-engineer, of course, that the discussion of the electricity market reform. And I feel that for the moment, the social and the just transition, we are thinking ex post adjustment and not ex ante. Again, no, I have no brilliant idea to know how to do it. But I think, again, if you want to have the people, so you have the past dependency of the institution, but you have to have the ownership of the society that finally wants it anyway, whatever there is a vote or don't vote. Or I think the election in Spain were very interesting because finally the far right was pretending climate was not existing, that they would bring water, whatever, it was very easy. And then people just said, look, that's not true, no? And I think that element, how you involve people in these governments, and maybe because the decentralization of many projects is, for me, very important. Last point, we will have maybe backlash, but the global trends are going bad and well in other direction. 2020, one car on 25 in the sales were electric. Now it's 1.5, not in Europe, globally. So the trend out there, the trend on green industrialization. And so I think we should think about how governance in a global setting where we will have to make contracts with others. If not, we will not develop that. Kurt was, as me in Nairobi, there is a real offer from African countries to say, look, we have this, we are resource rich. And that's where bilateral versus European will be difficult. And I think that could be a dimension we develop in the discussion further on. Can we offer a sort of a social contract with African countries that put a certain norms, including human rights, including price, and development on their own territory that we could offer at Europe? And that's where I see the problem, because of course, for the moment, it's totally transactional. Every country goes there for gas as for cobalt or for copper or for lithium. So again, maybe something to contribute, but that's my main element. Finally, for the next Commission challenge and your two presidencies, at the same time, that could be a wonderful, given the war element, given the fact that we are looking at an expanded Europe, this network could be a project of solidarity across the region, a sort of peace project, which is my concern these days. How we offer that railways, networks, is about connecting people and not letting them go. And again, but it should be a really people-inspired. So if we can develop that element, I think that would be very good. But I have the same concern about the leaders' decision on, look at the G20 or even G7 these days.
Thank you. I think we're coming to the end of this session. We still have 4 or 5 minutes. So let me just make one point and then give back the floor to the speakers. The point I wanted to make is that with respect to this idea that, we are emphasizing governance too much and some of the solutions we're proposing are counterproductive. When we speak in governance, we're speaking data, we're speaking money, we're speaking instruments, we're speaking orchestration. I don't think those issues are second order. I mean, I think they are first order. And when we are suggesting to have the conversation taken to the level of heads of state and government, it's not for legislation, it's for implementation. And I don't think, we would be well advanced if essentially we would keep the discussion at European level on issues of legislation on which there is not much to do anyway, and the implementation would just fall short because of the reluctance on the part of the member states to confront the financial cost and the political cost of doing it. So I think that's basically the reason why we are advocating what we're saying. Simone, you want to 1 minute each, really, not
Yeah,
more.
maybe just one very quick point on the SHARP idea and this idea of bringing together the head of state of governments at least once a year to discuss this. It's not just to have a closer oversight to their own energy ministers, right? The overall idea there is that the green transition is going to touch every single corner of our economy, our society, and our policy-making machine, right? Therefore, there needs to be that level of coordination and steering then among different ministers, right, at the governmental level. So I think that is something that we put forward, really having in mind, okay, you need the energy ministers, you need possibly the agriculture ministers, you need the finance ministers. So you need a broader coordination, and the more we advance in this process, the stronger this coordination will have to be, because otherwise there is a risk that the process will either be delayed or derail. So that's a bit the spirit of that. And again, it's also a way to enhance accountability. We cannot run this transition letting people and populist parties play with that argument, think this is a technocratic exercise. Because we know that very well, that after migration, this is a perfect topic, and we see that already, to fuel populism. So bringing this at the roots to the head of states, and then I very much agree with you now, this idea of the climate pact down to people, in our view, is the key to the political sustainability of the project.
Teresa?
It's a minute comment, but I'm deeply convinced that climate and energy provide a huge, fantastic opportunity to build Europe, a better Europe, and to deploy what we could call, in a very theoretical approach, European values, both domestically and elsewhere. So a peace project for the world. So we should not allow ourselves to steal this opportunity by fragmentation or very short-minded approach. This is why I think that if, as we all tend to agree, this should ask us to change so many things, such a cross-cutting approach on what does climate and energy mean for our day-to-day life. It is good to have political discussion at the leadership level. It's not that the leaders need to say if the grids need to be connected here or there. It is not to ask them to do this or that. It's that we need a common political and social understanding. And this is why I think that we need to build this as a positive agenda, and ensuring that barriers, difficulties, fears, breaking inertias is at reach. And this opens many question marks on how we can manage this transformation.
Thank you. Dina?
I wanted to build further on what Laurence said on the peace project. It is, and it still is, a peace project.
Exactly.
And energy, Europe was an energy project. It was a peace project built on energy, with the coal and the steel community, and the electrification that we are living now, and the renewable energy revolution that we are living now, also is a peace project, because we are living in a war, still living in a war. Maybe we are not experience it every day now on our energy invoices as we did last summer 1 year ago, but there are still people being killed. And the way out of the crisis is renewable energy. The European Commission has successfully launched the solar call for solar panels to Ukraine, and it's these solar panels that are giving back a future to children in Ukraine, because they can go to school again. And this peace project is larger than just war, because this climate crisis that we are living now is also threatening food supply, is making people flee, and the common solution out of it is renewable energy. And it's still it is, and it still is, a peace project. And I wanted to conclude on just Kurt, who talked for 30 seconds on the 2040 targets, just to support you a full 100% on that, a discussion that we maybe we should also be putting this into motion in the months to come. And why is that important? That's to you important. I understand that you have to do investments and that you have to have an horizon on the next 3 years. I understand it because it's you that will sign off on the investment, and it's in your decision gates within in your company. They will come see you, and you are the one signing it off. But an investment for the upcoming 10 and 20 years. So it's also you and also your members that are the first to come see me when we don't have long-term targets. Because then you come and you say, hey, Minister, I'm going to expend X million, but after 3 years, are you going to change your course or not? What is the long-term target? And so this balance between short-term, mid-term, and long-term target is the same balance as we need between central and decentralized decision-making.
Thank you. Leonard?
I think there are no doubts on the long-term targets and path. You know, we're talking then percentages up and down, but the long-term perspective is clear. It's a green energy transition. And there's no doubt in the industry at all. It's crystal clear. The question is sometimes at which speed and which technology, and then sometimes there's a hiccup like last week, and then we all think, so what has happened? No? But the long-term perspective is clear. So there's not a doubt. Second, Europe is the solution. To put it a bit black and white, there are no domestic markets anymore. There's only a European market. I mean, yes, there are national markets. I understand that we have national regulators. I'm acting in them. But in reality, it's Europe. So the solution also must be Europe. There's also no question around that. Not only in energy, I might say. There are a number of other areas where we have figured out that we can only be successful with Europe. So there's no doubt that we need to develop the European, like the European governance, the European influence, and that's a difficult discussion. Now, again, there's also no doubt that a step towards a successful transition, the step to making Europe successful is successful execution, also in the short term, if I might repeat myself. So no contradiction. Yeah? And I think it's true. So, it's true, if the long-term framework is wrong, it doesn't help if I deliver in the short term, but if I don't deliver in the short term, the long-term framework doesn't help. So it's actually complementary. So we should build on that. My plea was then finally to say, let's do that, plus let's add as much as we can within the existing frameworks that we have. There's no reason why we could not do both in parallel. And so if we conclude on that side, then I'm back in the team here again.
Good.
Yes, 3 points. First, to assure Minister van der Straten that we're working hard on the 2040 target. We're already engaged in the impact assessment. This will be a big priority for the Commissioner-designate Hoekstra with the support of the whole college. And we do it in a way that we will not only give the long-term perspective, but also facilitate implementation this decade. That is very clearly in our mind. Secondly, I agree with the Green Deal being a peace project. It's about making peace with our planet, which we absolutely need. It's very urgent, but also making peace with people, not only in Europe, but also vis-à-vis the rest of the world. And that external dimension is something we really need to become much more attentive to and active on. And then thirdly, on the question of the Council, who am I as Commission official to give advice to the Council? I would not dare do that. But where I do follow you, and where I would agree, Simone, if there is a way of bringing in agriculture into the overall discussion in a more consistent way, then I immediately sign for that. But I also would like to say that I still remember vividly the all-nighter in the European Council in December 2020. When the President of the European Council had to conclude that there was unanimity on climate neutrality with the exception of one country. Mm-hmm. And that is often what can happen. And what I've seen from my experience is that there is sometimes a reluctance to put issues at the level of the heads of state and government because there's always an election somewhere. There's always an issue that is very divisive. I could not imagine what, for example, a discussion on e-fuels and cars would have given in a discussion on the European level. And
Right.
every time when there is a strategic discussion, there are leaders who come up with their specific interests. So we need to be very aware of this. But if we find a way of having a true strategic discussion at leaders level, of course, we would very much support that.
Thank you. Laurence, you have the last word.
So anyway, I think the proposal of the paper is more an evolution than a revolution, and anyway, all this improvement has to be made. Oversight and accountability, I totally agree with Simone, very important. I do think that we are still in a very difficult moment. Because yes, the industry is behind that transition, but yes, there are other parts that are not in favor. And we are now in a very conflictual moment where, frankly, the oil and gas sector is playing against that, saying they can continue as ever. And so it's a moment of truth. That's why, at the same time, we need the political discussion, but we need, and that, in a way, for my question for you, if there is no industrial voices that say, as well as people, and, we need, that said, yes, this is a peace project we want, for the moment, it's absolutely not sure we are winning. We could have lost COVID, many moments, but we can lose, in my view, I suppose everybody here is anxious about that. We can lose everything with the next wave of election. And so if it's not a problem only on the institution, it's a problem of people, of actors, from the local level to the industry. And I think we have to hear the voices now. I'm not totally secure of what is happening. So that's why your governance, it's about what the voice of people are, whatever they are, and it's about political economy as well. So just to let you know, you need to confront if we want to keep that as well.
Thank you. As I said, it's been the last words. I would like to thank all the panelists for a very rich discussion, and apologies for being a bit behind schedule.
Thank you.